Welcome back, Giants fans. Today I'm going to be doing my first ever mock draft on the channel. It is one of what I plan to be 4 leading up into the draft. 1 early in the process, 1 after free agency when we find out where all the big names are going, the Nick Foles, the etc. That could change the complete perspective of this year's draft. 1 after the combine, after we see how these top prospects perform, and 1 leading up into the draft. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. The Arizona Cardinals sit at the 1 spot. They, of course, have Cliff Kingsbury as their new coach. Arizona has a ton of holes on both sides of the football. They have a weak offensive line. They don't have the strongest defense. And in this year's draft, in my opinion, there are 3 names at the top that should be the consensus top 3 picks. All on the defensive side of the ball. It's just a matter of who you prefer. And with the number 1 overall selection, I had the Arizona Cardinals selecting Quinnen Williams. Quinnen Williams, of course, from Alabama, is an absolute beast, and he took over this year. He was barely on the field his first 2 years in college football, and he was a defensive end. He was an edge rusher. This year, he put on 35 to 40 pounds to be able to convert to nose tackle, and he really flourished. He was, in my opinion, the best player in the country this year. That's how good this guy is, and he's just a special talent. And I think he would bring a ton to that Arizona football team, and I think he's too good to pass. I'm also expecting Williams to have a killer workout at the combine. I mean, for a man his size, you should not be as athletic as he is. I think scouts and GMs are going to see this, and they are going to be drooling at the mouth. So, with the number 1 overall selection, I have the Arizona Cardinals. Even with all the trade rumors and the speculation that they might want Kyler Murray and he might not love Josh Rosen, I think he sticks to his guns. And I think they take Quinnen Williams at number 1. With the number 2 overall selection, the San Francisco 49ers are up. And, of course, the 49ers had a very disappointing year this year, mainly due to the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo suffered a horrible injury. He should be back this year. He should be okay. And the Niners, in my opinion, their biggest need is they really need to get him some weapons. They don't have any weapons on that team. But unfortunately for the 49ers, with the number 2 overall pick, and it's not really unfortunate because there were some unbelievable defensive players in this draft. And the 49ers could use some help on that side of the ball as well. And I think the 49ers will look to improve at the wide receiver position later in the draft. Try to get Garoppolo some weapons. But Nick Bosa, is just way too good to pass up here from Ohio State. Bosa, of course, the one thing I will say is he has had injury history. He had an ACL tear leading up into his collegiate career, and last year he had an abdominal injury. A lot of people said it wasn't too serious, and that he sat out the season mainly due to the fact that he wanted to prepare for this draft, and he didn't want to risk further injury. Now, some people may look down on that. They may say that he's not a competitor and whatever else, and maybe there's some knocks on that, but this guy's too talented. He's not a freak athlete. He's very athletic, but he's so skilled and his technique is off the charts. He, of course, is the brother of standout Joey Bosa, who's been an elite pass rusher at the NFL level. And I think he's too good to pass up here for the 49ers. I have the 49ers selecting Nick Bosa. Which brings me to number 3, the New York Jets. The Jets last year, of course, made a huge splash in the draft when they traded 3 future second-round picks to move up and acquire Sam Darnold, who they hope to be their quarterback for the next 15 years. The Jets, they have some holes as well. They could certainly use a playmaker at the wide receiver position. They could certainly use some help on that offensive line. And I think the Jets here could potentially be tempted to trade down to fill in those holes because, in my opinion, there's not an offensive tackle that is worthy of taking at the number 3 position. But if they stay at 3, which in this mock draft I had them doing, I'm going to have the Jets selecting, even though he doesn't fit their scheme. He projects to be a 3-4 outside linebacker. The Jets, of course, have converted to a 4-3 system. But I think Josh Allen is too good to pass up here. He is a freak. He is a freak athlete, a hard worker. Much like Quinnen Williams, who I said earlier, this man hit the gym. He was able to put on 30, 35 pounds of muscle. A lot of scouts going into the season before he had done that had him projected as a 2nd to 3rd round pick because they viewed him as a situational pass rusher because he didn't have the strength they thought to play an every down role. Now that he's put on that weight, I mean, he flourished this year in college. He was unbelievable. Probably the best pass rusher in college football this year from the Kentucky Wildcats. And I have the Jets selecting Allen there. I think he's too good to pass up, even though he doesn't necessarily fit the scheme There's some players that you don't pass up, and Josh Allen's one of them. At the number 4 spot, I have the Oakland Raiders selecting one of the most special players in this year's draft. And before I tell you who it is, a lot of people might say the Raiders are in a prime position to trade down. And, of course, they have done that throughout the season. They traded Khalil Mack. They traded Amari Cooper, which is why they have 3 first-round picks in this year's draft. But I can't have them trading down yet because I don't know how these quarterbacks are going to perform at the Combine. They may disappoint. Dwayne Haskins may disappoint. Kyler Murray may disappoint. I don't know. And that is why in my first mock draft, I didn't have them trading down. I had them staying where they were and taking a transcendent talent in Devin White. Now, a lot of people may say that it's way too early to take an inside linebacker. That's fair. It's very rare an inside linebacker goes in the top 5 picks. But Devin White, to me, is just a supreme talent. He really is. I think he could easily be the best middle linebacker in football early in his career. I mean, that's how special I think this guy is. He reminds me of Ryan Shazier, but he's more powerful. Shazier was of course before his horrible injury, was a freak athlete, and he's very similar. Shazier ran like a 4.38 40. This kid, when he was a senior in high school, ran a 4.47, which is absurd for a middle linebacker, and he weighed 258 when he did that. He now weighs 240. So I expect him to really impress at the Combine. He's one of these guys that I see shooting up the draft charts, and that's why I have the Raiders taking him with the number 4 overall selection. At number 5, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Buccaneers this year had a great offense. They really did. An underrated offense. They put up a ton of points. Fitzmagic actually had a really good year early in the season. They, of course, lost their offensive coordinator, so I think he had something to do with that. But I do think the Bucs have to focus on the offensive line, which is very weak, and their defense. Their defense is trash, to be honest. It was probably the worst defense in all of football last year. And there's a player here who I really like. He reminds me of Aaron Donald. Now, I'm not going to say he's going to be Aaron Donald, but he reminds me of him because of his athleticism, and of course he plays the same position, and he's undersized, much like a lot of people said about Aaron Donald. Donald only stands at 6 feet, and so does Ed Oliver. And I have at the number 5 pick, I have the Bucs taking Ed Oliver. I think he's the type of player with a huge upside. He could easily be the best player in this draft. And I like Ed Oliver out of Houston to go number 5 to the Tampa Bay Bucs. Next up at number 6 is the New York Giants, and we know as Giants fans that they have a ton of holes to fill. They really do. The offensive line is subpar. They only have 2 starters going into this year's season. A lot of people expect them to bring back Brown and Halapio. We'll see where that goes. But they could certainly use an offensive lineman in this draft, and Jonah Williams could potentially be a guy they target with the 6th overall pick. We all know that Gettleman loves hog mollies. They need pass rushers. They absolutely do, and there's certainly some guys on the board here. Montez Sweat, for example. Ferrel. There are some options here for the New York Giants, but I do think with an aging quarterback, I think in this situation, if nobody trades up, I have the New York Giants in my first mock draft selecting Dwayne Haskins, the quarterback out of Ohio State. I think Dwayne Haskins fits what the Giants do better than any quarterback in this draft, other than possibly Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, of course, ran a pro-style offense over at Duke, but Haskins has a higher ceiling. I like Haskins a lot. I do recognize the holes in his game, but I think he is a perfect candidate to learn under Eli for a season. And with the number 6 overall selection in my first mock draft, I have the Giants selecting Dwayne Haskins. Which brings me to number 7. The Jacksonville Jaguars are in a situation much like the Giants. They have some holes throughout their team, but the biggest hole, the most glaring hole, is the quarterback position. Blake Bortles has been a bust. Now, the Jaguars took him with the number 3 overall selection about 5 years ago, and he's been a complete disappointment. They signed him to a 3-year deal last year, but I do think that the Jaguars know they need a quarterback. Now, they very well may go out there and get Nick Foles, but I cannot predict that in this mock draft. So, in my first mock draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I have selecting Drew Lock. Drew Lock, I think, is the type of quarterback in this year's draft that is really going to impress the scouts. He's got an electric arm, and he is going to impress at the Combine. I see his stock rising at the Combine. I wouldn't be shocked if the Giants have him number 1 on their board, to be honest, after the Combine. Drew Lock has a lot of tools. I'm not in love with the kid, but I do think the Jaguars will fall in love with his upside, much like they did with Bortles. Bortles had a lot of good tools at the Combine. That's when he shot up the draft charts. And I see a very similar thing for Drew Lock here. And I have the Jaguars at number 7 getting their quarterback, Drew Lock. At number 8, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions for years have had the same problem. The defense has been weak, and they haven't had a running game. Now, last year they went out there, they got a running back who did pretty well as their first-round selection. But this year, I have them really focusing on the defense, and I have them taking a guy who I think is a special talent, the defensive end from Florida State, Brian Burns. I think Burns would add to that defense. He would give them a very athletic pass rusher, and a guy that could really help the defense over there. So at number 8, I have Brian Burns going to the Detroit Lions, which brings me to number 9, the Buffalo Bills. This will be my first trade in this year's draft. The Buffalo Bills, to me, have a bunch of needs. They need a playmaker on offense, and they need a lot of offensive line help. Their offensive line is awful. Josh Allen was running for his life, and for a rookie quarterback, you could really use that, and Jonah Williams would make perfect sense here. But if I'm the Bills, I look at the situation, and I don't see a standout offensive tackle in this year's draft. I see 3 or 4 that are very close, and if I have an opportunity to trade down here, I think I would do it, and that's what I'm going to have the Buffalo Bills doing in this year's draft. I have the Buffalo Bills swapping first-round picks with the Washington Redskins, and the Washington Redskins giving up their 2020 first-round pick to move up and get a quarterback. Alex Smith, of course, went down with an injury this year, and we don't know if he's ever going to be back, and the Redskins desperately need a quarterback, and I have them going up to number 9 and selecting the most electric player in this year's draft, the Heisman Trophy winner, Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray is going to be a Washington Redskin. I really believe that in this year's draft. I don't know if the Redskins will trade up or not, but something tells me that they're going to go after Kyler Murray, and we all know their owner, Snyder, likes to make splashes. Well, there wouldn't be a bigger splash in this year's draft. So I have the Redskins trading up to number 9 and selecting Kyler Murray. At number 10, we have the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, a lot of people think will take a quarterback. In this year's draft, I did not have them moving up to acquire Drew Lock, which is what a lot of people are saying. They think they love Drew Lock. They think they'll trade up possibly and jump the Giants and take him in the first 5 picks. But I have the Broncos staying put. Elway, of course, spent some money last year on Case Keenum. And Keenum was mediocre, but the Broncos have a lot of holes. The offensive line is very weak. And I think Jonah Williams is too good of a talent here to pass up for them. I think they view him as a guy that they could plug in there for 15 years at the tackle spot. And the Broncos are happy to get Jonah Williams at number 10. At number 11, the Cincinnati Bengals are up, and I'm going to have back-to-back tackles. A guy that's really moving up the mocks. If you go back and you look about 2-3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, this guy was projected as a very late first round, early to mid-second round pick. But he had a great Senior Bowl. And Dalton Risner, I have going number 11 to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals are a complete mess right now, and they could use a safe, steady pick. A guy that they know is going to be there that they could plug in, much like I said with Jonah Williams for the next 15 years. They could be part of that rebuilding process. I like Risner a lot. He's a guy that I'd consider the Giants taking if they were able to trade down in the first round. But at number 11, I have the Bengals taking Dalton Risner. At number 12, the Green Bay Packers are up, and the Green Bay Packers have a lot of holes. Really, it's Aaron Rodgers and nobody else. It's a very similar situation to the Colts when they had Peyton Manning. And when Peyton Manning went down, you saw that team go 1-15. And I think the Packers would be very similar if Rodgers ever went down. The fact that they only won 6 games this year with Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback tells you all you need to know about this team and the problems they have. But one problem, alarming problem, that I really see coming to fruition is they're going to need a pass rusher. They really are, especially with Clay Matthews aging and hitting the free agency market. There's a good chance he doesn't come back. And that is why at number 12, I have the Packers selecting a pass rusher, the best one on the board. And that's Montez Sweat. He fits perfectly with their system. They'll plug him right in at the outside linebacker position. And I think he'll flourish for the Green Bay Packers. So at number 12, I have the Packers selecting Montez Sweat. At number 13, the Miami Dolphins are up. And the Dolphins, I fully expect to part ways with Ryan Tannehill. I don't know where Tannehill is going to end up, but I don't think it'll be with the Dolphins. And the Dolphins have an issue at the quarterback position. There's already 3 taken. And there's only one, in my opinion, that warrants being drafted in the early first round. Maybe you could argue Will Greer's a late first round pick. But Daniel Jones, I have going to the Miami Dolphins. I think he's the most pro-ready quarterback in this year's draft. And I like his upside. I do like Daniel Jones. I don't think he's ever going to be a superstar. But I think he could easily be a good quarterback. And he, of course, has good pedigree. He learned under the same coach that Eli did, that Peyton Manning did. And I like Daniel Jones. And I have the Dolphins selecting him with the number 13 overall selection. At number 14, we have the Atlanta Falcons. And the Falcons this year had a ton of injuries on the defensive side of the football specifically. Of course, Freeman got hurt at the running back spot, but they have a lot of talent, really, on both sides of the ball. And I expect the Falcons to have a bounce back year next year. But if they do need improvement, in my opinion, it's more so on the defensive end. And they could certainly use a pass rusher. And there's a guy here that, in my opinion, has dropped. There's actually a few players that they could choose here that have dropped. Rashan Gary and Ferrel. I'm going to have them taking Ferrel out of Clemson. I like him as an edge rusher. I think that he would help their team immediately on the defensive side of the ball. I think he makes a ton of sense for the Falcons here at number 14. So I like Ferrel to the Falcons there. At number 15, we have the Buffalo Bills. Of course, they had traded down. They acquired next year's first-round pick from the Washington Redskins, and that should be a pretty decent pick because I don't expect the Redskins to run away. So I think it's a good trade for the Bills. And as I said, I think there's 3 or 4 offensive tackles they could potentially take that are clumped together. Most people have Jonah Williams 1, but I don't think he's far and away the best. And the Bills still get a good offensive tackle here. I have them taking Jawaan Taylor from Florida. And the Bills fill a need. They find a tackle that they hope could protect their first-round pick from last year, Josh Allen. Next up at 16 is the Carolina Panthers. And the Panthers certainly have a lot of holes to fill. They really do. And with Cam Newton out, I honestly don't expect them to have that good of a year next year. They have a very competitive division, and I can't expect them to win more than 5 or 6 games without Cam Newton next year. But they have a lot of holes, as I said. They could certainly use an upgrade at the offensive line. They definitely could use another playmaker at the wide receiver position. And there are some options here for that. They could go Brown. They could go Metcalf. But I just think that there's a player on the board here who shouldn't be. A player who's supremely talented, who I think could easily end up being one of the top 3 or 4 players in this draft. And he could certainly go much higher than this. A lot of people have him going higher. His measurables are off the chart. He has 36-inch arms. He's 6'6". He's a freak athlete. He was actually the number 1 rated player coming out of high school in 2016. I have them taking Rashan Gary out of Michigan. Now, some people think he's going to be an interior lineman at the pro level. Some people think he may go outside and play DN. But either way, I think he's too talented, too much upside here at 16 for the Carolina Panthers to pass up, even though it might not be their biggest glaring need. I got Rashan Gary going to Carolina. At number 17, the Cleveland Browns are up. The Browns, of course, really took a huge jump last year. This was a team that won 1 game in the previous 2 seasons. They took Baker Mayfield. They took Denzel Ward. They had a lot of draft picks last year. They're not used to this. They're drafted in the mid-first round this year. And even though they had a pretty good offensive line, they actually ranked 3rd in pass protection. I think they could use another tackle. And I do like them to take Andre Dillard here of Washington State. As you notice, I'm having a run of offensive tackles here. This is where I expect them to go mid-first round, 4 or 5 of them. And at number 18, I have another offensive tackle. I have Greg Little, who easily could, after the combine, who knows, he could end up being the number 1 offensive tackle selected in this year's draft. But I have the Minnesota Vikings, who have a glaring need on the offensive line. That is by far the biggest hole. They have a lot of nice pieces. They have a lot of talent on the defensive end. They have a lot of explosive players on offense. But their biggest hole, in my opinion, is offensive tackle. And they're going to take Greg Little here at 18, who I think has a lot of upside. Could be a bust, but the upside is too much to pass up at 18. At number 19, the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Titans, I wasn't sure what to do because I think that the Titans really could use a playmaker for Mariota. They really could. But there was one player that I just saw, he kept falling on my draft board. It's a guy who I think is probably a top 10 talent in this year's draft. And I think the Titans are getting the best value here, actually, in my first mock draft at number 19. I have the Titans selecting Greedy Williams. Greedy Williams is, in my opinion, the best corner in this draft. Some may argue Byron Murphy, other players, but I really like Greedy Williams out of LSU. And I have him going number 19 to the Tennessee Titans. At number 20, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers up. The Pittsburgh Steelers, of course, drafted Shazier, as I said earlier, about 5-6 years ago, to be the man in the middle, the future Mike. But, of course, Shazier suffered an absolutely atrocious injury. And I have the Steelers filling in for him here with the 20th overall selection. They took Shazier 15th overall in that draft. I have him taking Devin Bush, the inside linebacker, who I think is the second best inside linebacker in this year's draft. So I have the Steelers at number 20 going Devin Bush. At number 21, the Seattle Seahawks are up. And the Seattle Seahawks, they of course were legendary when they were at their best for the Legion of Boom, that great secondary. Since then, they've lost some pieces. I expect them to lose Earl Thomas this year in free agency as well. And I expect them to try to start to rebuild that secondary in this year's draft with the first-round pick. Now, you could argue they could go offensive linemen, but in this mock, I mean, I've now had 5 offensive linemen go in the last 6 picks. It's slim pickings there for first-round talent. So I have them bolstering the secondary with Byron Murphy, who I think is a very talented cornerback, and I got him going number 21. At number 22, the Baltimore Ravens are up, and great defense. Arguably the best defense in football. Either them or the Bears last year. They could use a weapon, that's for sure, especially to help out Lamar Jackson, who is still learning on the fly. Still doesn't have the best arm. Very dual-threat quarterback, though. Very talented. I have them trying to help him out here at the number 22 selection. DK Metcalf, they're going to go out there. They're going to get themselves a wide receiver. And Metcalf may be the most talented receiver in this draft. At number 23, the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans last year surrendered the most sacks in football. They have a ton of talent on both sides of the ball. Very similar to the Minnesota Vikings, the team I said earlier. A lot of talent on defense, a lot of weapons on offense. With everything they got going over there with Hopkins, Watson, everybody else. But the offensive line is absolutely atrocious, and I have them, even though a lot have already come off the board, I have them taking Cody Ford, the offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, with the 23rd overall selection. At number 24, the Raiders are up. The Raiders, of course, acquired this pick when they traded Amari Cooper to the Dallas Cowboys. This is their second of 3 first-round selections, and I'm going to have them filling in for Amari Cooper. I'm going to have them taking a wide receiver here because they certainly need one. And there's a guy that I like here, and that's Marquise Hollywood Brown. I think he's supremely talented. I don't know if he's going to be as good as Amari Cooper is, especially the way Cooper played when he left the Raiders. But I like Brown. I think he has an upside in the NFL, and I think he's a good pick here for them. I think it fills a need, and he's one of the better players still left on the board. So I think it's a perfect fit. I like Brown to the Raiders at 24. At number 25, the Philadelphia Eagles. I have them going out there, improving their defense, going out there, getting a cornerback. Out of Mississippi State, I have them taking DeAndre Baker. Now, the Eagles, much like a lot of teams I've said, the offensive line wasn't nearly as good as it was this Super Bowl year. They weren't nearly as good on defense against the run. They could certainly use some D linemen, but I do like Baker here to go to the Eagles. At number 26, the Colts are up, and the Colts are going to go out there. They're going to take Deontay Thompson, who I think is the best safety in this year's draft. I like him a lot, and that's who I have them taken. The offense, I think, is really good. They could certainly use a weapon. T.Y. Hilton's a nice target, but they could use another wide receiver for Andrew Luck. But I think they really need to improve that defense, and I think Thompson would really help that defense. The offensive line, they did a great job. It was the best offensive line in the sport last year. So the offense, I wouldn't worry too much in the first round for the Colts. I'm focused on the defensive end, and with Thompson falling to me at 26, I couldn't pass him up. At 27, the Raiders are up again. And this, of course, was the pick that they acquired when they traded Khalil Mack to the Bears. And I have them going out there getting a linebacker, Mack Wilson of Alabama. I like the Raiders to take Wilson here with the 27th overall selection. At 28, the Chargers are up. And there's a player here who I think is another guy that I could see as the process develops with the combine and everything else. I could see this guy going up charts. Very talented. I have the Chargers selecting Jeffrey Simmons, the D tackle out of Mississippi State. This guy has a lot of talent. He has a nonstop motor. I like him a lot. I think this is a great value pick in my mock draft for the Chargers. And I think if he is there, they would take him. I like the Chargers here to take Simmons with the 28th overall selection. At 29, I have the Chiefs trying to fix that defense. We all know the offense is very explosive under Coach Andy Reid. They had a record-breaking offense this year. It was absolutely unbelievable, and their quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, won the MVP. So I expect them to focus on defense in this year's draft early and often. And with their first selection, with the 29th overall selection, I have them taking Nasir Adderley out of Delaware, the free safety. I like him there to go to the Chiefs. At number 30, I have the Packers selecting who most people say is the best offensive guard in this year's draft. And he just sounds like a guy that would play for the Packers. I think he fits. I can't even pronounce his name that well, but it just looks like a name that would play there. Biao Bonswallow, I think his name is. And I know I'm not pronouncing it right, but everything I've read on this guy, a lot of people like him. Good interior offensive lineman. I like the Packers to take him at 30. Of course, the Packers have 2 first-round picks, and with their second, I have them taking him. At number 31, the Rams, of course, coming off a depressing Super Bowl loss. And the Rams, to be honest with you, they don't have a lot of needs. They don't have a lot of holes on that team. So I expect them to take who they think is the best available player. And from everything I've read, I like this guy a lot. He's got high upside. The D-end out of Texas. I have them taking Charles Aminu, the defensive end out of Texas. Now, again, I don't watch Texas football. I may be mispronouncing that name. But everything I read, I like this kid. And I think he will help them out a lot. I watched a couple of highlight clips. I do like the Rams to take him at 31. And at 32, the Patriots could go quarterback. They could certainly consider Will Grier here with the aging Tom Brady. I mean, he is 42 years old. I'm not going to have them doing that, though. I'm going to have them taking a wide receiver. I'm going to have them trying to help out their quarterback. I have them taking Deebo Samuel of South Carolina. I think that he'd be a nice pick for them. And it's good value there with the number 32 overall selection. So that's my mock draft, guys. And then for the Giants, after all this, a few names that I wrote down that I think would be good targets in the second round in this scenario. Will Grier, potentially, if they had not taken a quarterback, could be a guy that they target in the second round if they go otherwise. Chris Lindstrom, I like him. Everything I've read about him, the offensive guard from Boston College, you could take him. And Ja'Kai Polite of Florida. Everything I've read on this guy, he's an edge rusher and has a lot of talent. He's a guy that some people have going mid-first round, but I've seen other people have him outside of their first round. That's a guy that the Giants could potentially get in this scenario in the second round. So just a couple of names I wanted to throw out there for second round possibilities under this year's mock. I had a good time doing this. I did the best I could. I'm looking forward to doing my second one. As I said earlier, that will be after free agency, after we see where Foles goes, everybody else, all the holes that are filled in via free agency. That'll give us some answers as to where I think these teams will go in the first round. But this is my first mock draft. If you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Tell me what you think. As always, cheers.